Erev Tov. If you look at a Jewish calendar, you'll see that in the box it says that today is Yom Yerushalayim, which is Jerusalem Day. So what's that all about? In November of 1947, the United Nations voted to partition the land of Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. And ultimately, Jerusalem was supposed to be an international city, not given to anyone. As you know, the Jews accepted the partition plan, the Arabs rejected it. On May 14th, 1948, the British left Palestine. David Ben-Gurion proclaims the state of Israel. At that very moment, several Arab countries invaded. One of the first things that happened is Ben-Gurion understood the critical importance, not only geographically, but historically, spiritually, religiously, to the Jewish people. So there was an attempt to try to bring Jerusalem into the land that was allotted to the Jewish people. And the Israelis were able to occupy West Jerusalem, but the Jordanians besieged the old city and East Jerusalem. There were about 2,000 Jews still living in the old city in May of 1948. Ultimately, they had to surrender, or otherwise they would have been starved out. So that took place, the surrender and the evacuation of about 2,000 Jews on May 28th, 1948. At that moment, there was a split between Israel and what was the West Bank of Jordan, and Jews lost access to the Kotel, to the Western Wall. They lost access to the oldest Jewish cemetery in the world on the Mount of Olives. We also know that in the 19 years from 1948 to 67, the Jordanians basically destroyed 58 synagogues that had been in the old city. Back in 1967, when the Israelis came back, they found that many of the gravestones on the Mount of Olives had been ripped out and had been used by the Jordanians for paving stones, building materials, and the worst desecration, they had been used for army latrines for the Jordanians. In May of 1967, Egypt and Syria prepared for war. Israel told King Hussein in Jordan, "You stay out of this and we will not touch you." But Jordan entered the conflict. On June 7th, 1967, that's the 28th day of the month of Iyar, Israel captured the old city and East Jerusalem, as well as Judea and Samaria, what we call the West Bank. A year later, in May of 1968, the chief rabbinate declared this date, the 28th of Iyar, as a minor religious holiday because Jews now had access back again to the Western Wall and the Temple Mount. Cantor Chesler has chosen a number of songs that speak to the importance, again, historically and religiously, of Jerusalem to the Jewish people. The first song comes from Psalm 137, Im Eshkachech, and it's well known to us. "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue stick to my palate. If I cease to think of you, if I do not keep Jerusalem in memory, even at my happiest hour." And of course, those verses are the reason that we break a glass at a Jewish wedding. Wedding is our happiest hour. The breaking of the glass reminds us of the destruction of Jerusalem. So our first song is Im Eshkachech. Elie Wiesel has a wonderful book called Legends of Our Time, and in it he's got a chapter about Colonel Mordechai Gur. Colonel Gur was known as Mutta, and he was the officer who led the Israeli soldiers into the old city and ultimately were the ones who conquered the Temple Mount and then came back to the Kotel, to the Western Wall. So in his chapter about Colonel Gur, Elie Wiesel retells the story of that incredible moment in 1967, June 7th, when the IDF, Tzahal, the Israeli Defense Forces, came into the old city and ultimately came back to the Western Wall. So I share a little bit of that chapter. What a story. There is prophecy in it and more. The more I listen to it, the more I like what I hear. Feverish preparations, mounting tension, orders and counter orders, terse telephone conversations, errands, details, muffled voices, and hurried steps in the night. The final stage before the first attack, gripped by a boundless fervor, disobeying orders, heedless of danger. Every paratrooper in the battalion wanted to fight in the front line at the very eye of the storm. The colonel led the way. His driver, a giant named Ben-Sur, kept jamming the accelerator to the floor, yet Mutta Gur was shouting, "Faster, Ben-Sur, faster!" Once they were forced to stop because an overturned Jordanian motorcycle, probably mine, Ben-Sur, what are you waiting for? Keep moving. There was no mine. At the entrance to the old city, a half-open gate, perhaps a trap. Go on, Ben-Sur, move. It was not a trap. Jumping out of the Jeep, useless in the narrow alleyways, the colonel stared, running with the others, ahead of the others, a wild, insane race. Shells ripping through the waning night, men blown to bits, the wounded among them moaning and crawling ahead on their knees. The paratroopers were running from street to street, from turret to turret, propelled by an irresistible, unrelenting force. Every one of them obscurely aware of having lived for this moment, for this race. And suddenly, over the deafening clangor, Motagur was shouting to his headquarters his report. Har Habayit biyadenu. The Har Habayit, the Temple Mount, is in our hands. Do you hear me? The Temple Mount is in our hands. And everywhere, on every front, in every home, officers and soldiers, children and old people wept and embraced. And in those tears, those explosions of feeling, there was an element of the unreal, which made the event unique and changed all those who lived through it. Our next song is from the Amidah. In a few minutes, we'll recite this very paragraph. It's the paragraph in the Amidah that begins, Yom Yerushalayim Ircha. And the words mean, and to Jerusalem, your city, O God, return in mercy and dwell there just as you promised you would, and build her speedily and in our day. The tune for this particular song, the words come right out of the Siddur. The tune comes from Shaika Paikov, who was born in 1937, lived on a kibbutz, and he served incredibly in 4 wars. The Sinai Campaign in 56, he fought in the Six-Day War in 67. That perhaps is what inspired this song. He fought in the Yom Kippur War, and he fought in the first war in Lebanon in 1982. When he wasn't fighting for Israel, Shaika Paikov became a music teacher. So here is Yom Yerushalayim Ircha. So in the 19 years that the Jordanians ruled the old city of Jerusalem, as we said, They destroyed 58 synagogues. They ripped up Jewish gravestones. They destroyed other synagogues. The most famous of the 58 was the Hurva synagogue. If you were in Israel 4 or 5 years ago or so, you may remember in the old city there was a very impressive arch. That's where the Hurva synagogue had stood. And in recent years, the Hurva has been rebuilt. In distinction to what the Jordanians did, the Israelis had a very different attitude when they came into what had been pretty much an Arab place for 19 years. We're told that one of the soldiers, when they conquered the Temple Mount, immediately climbed up on the Dome of the Rock, the Golden Dome, and he hung an Israeli flag. And Moshe Dayan, who was the defense minister, understood how painful seeing an Israeli flag would be to Arabs and Muslims on this cherished holy site. So Dayan immediately ordered the flag to be brought down. Later on that day, June 7th, the defense minister, Dayan, issued the following order. And it's very important to hear his words and to understand the difference between what the Jordanians did and what the Israelis did. This morning, the Israel Defense Forces liberated Jerusalem. We have united Jerusalem, the divided capital of Israel. We have returned to the holiest of our holy places, never to part from it again. To our Arab neighbors, we extend also at this hour, and with added emphasis at this hour, our hand in peace. And to our Christian and Muslim fellow citizens, we solemnly promise full religious freedom and rights. We did not come to Jerusalem for the sake of other people's holy places, and not to interfere with the inheritance of other faiths, but in order to safeguard its entirety and to live there together with others in unity. So our next song is Or Yerushalayim, Light and Jerusalem. The chorus goes like this: I have seen a city enveloped in light, and she rises in all the colors of the rainbow, and she plays within me like a ceremonial harp. I have seen a city enveloped in light. You should know that this particular song, words and music, was written by Yosef Sarig. He was born on kibbutz in 1944. He died in 1973. Whenever you read that an Israeli died in 1973, there's a good chance that it was in the Yom Kippur War. And indeed, Yosef Sarig was in a tank unit in the Golan Heights when he was killed. He was 29 years old. This is his song, Or Yerushalayim.
השקט שוב צונח כאן בשמי הערב, כדי הטיה מעל התהומות, ושמש אדומה נושקת להחרב, אל הפסגות המגדלים והחומות. ראיתי עוטפתו והיא עולה משלל צבעי הקשת והיא נוגנת בבכי נבל העשור ראיתי עוטפת אור ראיתי עוטפת אור והיא עולה בשלל צבעי הקשת והיא נוגנת בכנבל העשור ראיתי עוטפת הנה זוחל הצל מבין גבעות האורן קרב בסתר כאוהב השכנות ומעל פניו פריצות ריבו עיני האורן ולטפל ידיהם כן יפות ראיתי עוטפת אור והיא עולה בשלל צבעי הקשת והיא נוגנת בחנבל העשור ראיתי עוטפת אור ראיתי עוטפת אור והיא עולה בשלל צבעי הקשת והיא נוגנת בכנבל העשור ראיתי עוטפת אור.
It may very well be that the first mention of Jerusalem comes in the story of Abraham. Abraham comes to a city that's referred to as Salem or Shalem. And there he meets Melchizedek, apparently the local king. Many people think this was one of the early names of Jerusalem. Apparently, the origin of the name was Urusalimu, which means the city of the god Salim or Shalem, something like that. Then we know that King David conquers a city that stood at this spot. It was a city that was known as Yevus, and it was the capital city of the Jebusites, a local Canaanite tribe. David did an incredible thing because the nation was really split in two. There were the 10 tribes in the north, and then there were the 2 tribes in the south. David himself was from Bethlehem, and his capital had been in the south in Hebron. And David said, it doesn't make sense. How am I going to unite the country? So what did he do? He conquers this Jebusite city, Yevus, and he makes it his capital. Not only his capital, but the capital of all the Israelites. And the incredible thing is that it was just like Washington, D.C., which was right in the middle between the north and the south, and it didn't belong to anybody. Similarly, Yevus was able to unite the people because it was pretty much in the middle of Israel, hadn't belonged to one tribe or another before. In Psalm 122, we read one of David, according to tradition, one of David's psalms. So imagine David coming into this city after he conquers it. I rejoiced when they said to me, "We are going to the house of the Lord. Our feet stood inside your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem built up, a city knit together, to which tribes would make pilgrimage, the tribes of the Lord, as was enjoined upon Israel, to praise the name of the Lord. There the thrones of judgment stood, thrones of the house of David. Pray for the well-being of Jerusalem. May those who love you be at peace. May there be well-being within your ramparts, peace in your citadels. For the sake of my kin and friends, I pray for your well-being. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I seek your good. There's a phrase here in the third verse, Jerusalem built up, a city knit together, Ir shechubra yachtav. And what that really means is a city that was joined together, a city that was reunited. So if David lived approximately 1000 BCE and wrote this psalm, in the year 1967, when Jerusalem was again reunited, West Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, the new city, the old city, people read this ancient Psalm of David and said, it's as if he was a prophet. He was speaking about what would happen in our own day, a city that has been reunited. So our final song is one that you all know, maybe the most popular Israeli song or Jewish song during our lifetimes, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. The story behind it is very interesting. Every year in May at Independence Day, Israel had a song festival. And the mayor of the city, Teddy Kollek, had asked one of Israel's top songwriters, Naomi Shemer, if she would write a song dedicated to Jerusalem. Now, you have to remember that in May of 1967 was an incredibly tense time. At this very moment that Israel was celebrating its 19th anniversary and Independence Day, Egypt had sworn, we will drive the Jews into the sea. So here is this song that's written, and as soon as not only the audience, but the whole nation heard this song, they fell in love with it. They couldn't have enough of this song. And ultimately, it was only a matter of weeks later, from May to the beginning of June, when indeed Jerusalem became the focus of all of Israel and of all the Jewish people in the world. The well-known chorus is Jerusalem of gold. The reason is that in Jerusalem there's a law that you have to use Jerusalem stone, just like around our ark. You have to use that stone for every building. And when the sun rises and sets and shines off of that stone, it appears almost golden. So she wrote, Jerusalem of gold, of light, of bronze, I am a violin for all of your songs. So the poet, the songwriter says, my whole life is dedicated to creating songs about Jerusalem. And then Naomi Shemer in this song says, still today, as I come to sing to you and fashion for you crowns, I feel smaller than your youngest sons, less than the least of your poets. So here's this most important of Israeli songwriters who says, I'm writing a song, but I feel inadequate because of the great history. I'm comparing myself to King David, who wrote such poems about Jerusalem, to Yehuda Halevi, who wrote beautiful songs about Zion. She says, I am the least of your poets and the most insignificant of your children. And yet she wrote a song that will live forever. So here we conclude Yom Yerushalayim with Jerusalem of Gold.
אוויר הרים צלול קיין וריח אורנים נישא ברוח ארבעים עם כל המורים ותרים הטילן באבן שבויה בחלומה העיר הדשא בדן יושבת ומרימה עולה ירושלים של זהב של נחושת ושל אור אלוהיך שירייך אני ירושלים של זהב של נחושת ושל אור אלוהיך שירייך אני איך יבשו בורות המים כיכר השוק ריקה התפוקר אל הבית בעיר העתיקה מול המרות אשר בסלע מייערות גופות בין יורד ים המלח בדרך ירושלים של זהב של נחושת ושל אור אלוהיך שירייך אני ירושלים של זהב של נחושת ושל אור אלוהיך שירייך אני כינור